want to have a discussion. That's the that's the goal. The goal is actually to have a discussion in our community, which includes people in the New School from various divisions, but also beyond New School. People who are concerned about the election of Donald Trump and the implications of it for many, many things that we're committed to. And our idea, we're going to kind of start the discussion. So each of us will give a 5-minute presentation. And I'm going to be pretty kind of careful that we keep to that. It may be that we're going to go right through, or it may be that I'm going to think and you're going to signal to me that we should stop and then have a general discussion and then continue. We're considering our theme is social movements, then and now, and particularly drawing upon the experiences of the past to inform how we act in the present, how we resist likely unpleasant future challenges. The organization that's bringing this to you, or that is convening the event,
just in time.
We lost it. It's okay. It's not necessary. It is Public Seminar. I hope everyone in the room knows what Public Seminar is. It's essentially the online platform for the intellectual public and life of the New School for Social Research. And the faculty, the students, the staff, and their colleagues in New York, in the United States, and actually around the world. Please sit down. It hasn't even started yet. I'm just filling up time with words as we gather. The charge of the Public Seminar is open, critical, challenging engagement with the pressing issues of the day and enduring human problems. In our About page, we say, trying to spur discussion and informed action by any means necessary. So this teaching is an example of an unusual means. Our goal is to have the discussion here, then to take it online, and then so the presentations are going to be published, I'm hoping, over the weekend, and a video recording of the event will be posted on the site. And that's not the end of it. That's actually a way of continuing it, and I hope that we actually then sustain our discussions and our actions informed by what we do today. So that's the framework. We're seeking perspectives on the problems of the day, trying to inform social resistance, and actually inform the intellectual, political, public life of people, particularly of the New School. So we're concerned about things that we may do that need to be done in our institution, maybe courses, maybe concerns about defending vulnerable students, vulnerable faculty, people who are here or would like to come here. We could have discussions about, I think we're concerned about people who are hurting, so we should think about actually defending people who are hurting and providing support for people who are hurting. And we're an academic institution, we're an intellectual institution, so we want to deepen our perspectives on understanding this, I think, unique in American history circumstance that we are in. So, we're going to speak. I spoke first, and I'm just about done. Jeremy Varon will then continue what I had said and kind of add his 5 minutes of sense, and then Ann Stetow, Benoit Chaland, and Eva Woodley will as well. Each of us have social movement engagement. My presentation, in a sense, has already been published on Public Seminars. A piece I wrote about my personal pain and attempt to reflect upon the circumstances we were in yesterday. And each of us have different practical engagement, and we'll be speaking from our engagements, both as scholars and intellectuals and as activists. So, Jeremy.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thank you everybody for turning out today. Okay, so let me begin with the satisfaction of saying publicly what many of us have said privately, which is, what a fucking nightmare, right? Like millions of households on election night, mine was one of inconsolable grief and rage. Within the sea of pain were especially heartbreaking scenes. Immigrant and Muslim American families asking each other if their lives are newly in danger. A friend of mine consoling his sobbing African-American HIV-positive boyfriend who felt that a part of him had been killed that night by a country that was not willing to accept his very existence. 9-year-olds rushing into their bedrooms to reemerge in their superhero Halloween outfits and announcing to their anguished parents, "Don't worry, Mom and Dad, I'll save the Republic." And this strikes at the heart of a Brooklyn parent like me and Benoit. In the last weeks, we have struggled to push past the tears and remind each other that we're not alone. We have gorged ourselves on all the what-ifs and the smart essays laying blame in 1,000 directions, and some of us have already been in the streets, which is a good thing. Through it all, we now face the bracing fact that Trump will be the president no matter his blowout loss of the popular vote. So much of this election is without precedent, including happily this, that never before have so many people been so passionately aligned against a president before he has even assumed office. The resistance that is our focus today is already gathering. In my brief remarks, I will reject the role of elder, no matter my activist pedigree, pronouncing what is to be done and then telling young people to do it. That's absurd. We're all in this together, in a position to learn from and teach each other. Instead, I'll do two things. First, revisit moments in the American past, at once inspiring and disturbing, that hold lessons for today. And second, try to fire up the resistance itself, call it into being in a way that hopefully feels inspiring. So first, the historical stuff. This election was a terrible shock and setback, in ways unique, but not entirely without precedent. For many of us, it reminds us of Ronald Reagan's landslide victory in 1980, where you could feel the tectonic plates of American history shift. In many ways, the years preceding him were like recent years. America had lost a humiliating defeat in Vietnam, and the limits of empire were exposed. You had a kind of multicultural liberalism, in a sense, similar to the Obama coalition. Nixon was a disgraced figure, much as George Bush ended his administration as a disgraced figure. And the social movements of the 60s had, in some sense, been vindicated by Nixon's demise. Ronald Reagan represented an explicit repudiation of so many of the gains of the era preceding him. His goal was to turn back the clock of American culture, dismantle the New Deal, and reestablish a white, heteronormative order couched in saccharine images of the Eisenhower era, and then finally reassert strength through a militarized anti-communism and an escalation of the arms race that portended a nuclear war. So the Reagan years were really 8 years of pitched battle on many, many, many fronts. And then there were a lot of profound victories, hastening the end of apartheid, providing some dignity for people with HIV and AIDS, but also terrible, terrible defeats, measured in tens of thousands of lost lives in Latin America, tens of thousands of people dying of HIV, tens of thousands of people whose lives were made miserable by the urban blight that Reagan, exacerbated. So the stakes, felt profound and were profound. And we, I think, enter a sort of a new era of pitched battle on multiple fronts. Let me pivot quickly, to today. Yes, and say that, what we need is like a bold, emphatic, and energetic resistance. And then it starts with each of us, one by one, making a kind of covenant with ourselves to decide to devote a meaningful part of the next years of our lives to defending all the things that we hold dear, with special attention to those communities and those groups who are most vulnerable in this new order. And then my ultimate plea is that we not be a resistance of one, which is quite powerless and demoralizing, but rather be joiners, and specifically join groups, join organizations, work on specific issues. Don't think you can take down, the whole of Trump America, but try to make meaningful progress on a piece of it. And when you're part of a group, you can be picked up by your comrades. You will be motivated by a loyalty to them that sometimes exceeds your loyalty to, the grand cause. And then isolated rage, getting angry at your television set, confining your, upset to seminar and Facebook posts isn't going to cut it. And then we need to be equal to the extraordinary moral challenge as an institution and as individuals that history has given us. Like, the stakes are that big, infinitely big. And if we succeed in what we do, we will have, written one of the proudest chapters in the history of our institution. And you will look back on this, young people, as one of the proudest chapters of your life. That will be your immortal contribution to justice, freedom, equality, and
So heartening. It's right, every single one of us. And the thing is, I'll return to this at the end of my 5 minutes, we're together. The reaction to the election has been extraordinary. And there are millions of us. So now the next step is just what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and how each individual life is going to fit into this. And I think that is really hard for each person to figure out. We're talking about that maybe in the discussion about how you're going to place yourself. As some of you know, I do most of my political work at the New School, I guess that's true, and in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, this move, the Trump move, began a while ago. And I sometimes feel that we're in terrible isolation and not realize that country after country, like dominoes, has fallen to exactly, and not, I use the word exactly as only a faint exaggeration, what happened in Poland, what happened in Hungary in 2010, what happened 2 weeks ago in Bulgaria and Moldova, what is threatening to happen in Austria and France. This is huge.
And there are people here who can say, and what happened in Turkey?
And what happened in Turkey?
I'd like to ask.
We can generate our list.
Yeah. Does anyone come from a country or is concerned about a country where this is happening? So speak. Just say the country.
Poland.
Okay.
The ones you were.
The list can go on.
The list is actually quite long.
It's very long, and the family resemblance, and even though each one has its own path, I was recently on a panel, somebody from Latvia, somebody from Hungary, somebody from Russia, somebody from Romania, and me talking about Poland, and these stories had their specificities, when it started, who the main players were, how important was the church. I mean, there are a lot of variables in each situation. But the thing is, what was much more striking was that when the 5 of us were finished speaking, it was pretty clear it was the same phenomenon in very fundamental ways. And that is what we confront. Tectonic plates. Wow, yes, I remember 1980 in exactly that way. We're facing what can sometimes feel like a vacuum, a completely new set of ideas about how to confront this are now necessary. It's not just critique, but it's actually trying to imagine the re-enchantment of our side. And I say this with great earnestness because spending time in Poland, I can see that what the other side is offering has everything to do with anti-modern enchantment themes. The church makes life rich. The family makes life deep. The nation gives meaning. And there's a vacuum there that I think maybe some of us have to take responsibility for, that the re-enchantment of the world from the left perspective is a job, a project only intermittently carried out. And I think we're going to be thinking structurally and try to come up with visions of how we could reconfigure globalism to not be the globalism that all these people are reacting against with some reason. And so that's sort of what confronts us. I feel there's a sort of intellectual vacuum. Here we are, we're intellectuals. We have a huge task to think out what exactly we want globalism to be, because the idea that you can just get rid of it the way Poland is saying you can get rid of it is ridiculous. It's not going to happen.
Or Mr. Trump.
Almost the time. Is that my 5 minutes?
No, I said or Mr. Trump. You have
Or
45
Mr. Trump.
seconds.
So, to the glass half empty, this is big, really bigger than any of us quite imagine or know how to cope with. The glass half full, a lot is going on. There's huge resistance. And when I talk to people here and in Eastern Europe, people are working locally. There's the cities movements, which are movements that build on the fact that many city and local governments are much more progressive than the national takeover. So there are all kinds of places where one can begin to insert one's energy and where people are already working. I think one thing we're doing is generating a huge list of organizations. I completely want to ratify what Jeremy's saying, that choose your organization or choose your niche or choose your affinity group. Actually, we're going to all have to work now. And since we can't do everything, one of the things that's so horrible is that, every day you open the newspaper and you say, it can't be another disaster. You can't do all these things. So in our lives, we have to figure out what we're going to do. As a feminist, I may end up having to work on abortion again. I can't believe it. Abortion again? I'm in my 70s. Maybe that'll be it, or maybe it'll be something else. But I'm going to find a local place where actually I know people and I work with people in an ongoing way. I think that's very important, Jeremy, really. That you don't just think I'm in opposition and maybe I go to a demonstration. Actually, we have to find, there are many groups already. You don't have to start your own group, or you can. So finally, that's my 5 minutes.
Six minutes and 23 seconds. But you'll get to speak more.
Oh.
Okay, so I continue in this discussion a more international perspective, and the title of my brief presentation is called "The Disaster That Has Already Happened: Trump's Victory Seen from Afar." That is mostly from the Middle East. So people have projected onto Trump's victory all sorts of future fears: the rise of fascism, censorship, or even the end of democracy. I don't think we need to look that far into the future to see how dark things already are. We just need to look at what has happened in the 72 hours that followed Trump's elections. People who have threatened black people by words or acts on their properties, student marching on university campus with Confederate flags, women threatened, or Muslims who were verbally or at times physically aggressive on wearing a veil, or even here in New York. That has been the first real disaster. The gloves, for certain, are off, and some people feel they can take up violence with their own hands and use the bigoted, sexist, and racist comments of Trump as a justification for physical assault. The second disaster we have already seen play out after these 72 hours is the round of astonishing appointments to the coming Trump administration and some ensuing silences. To me, this begs the question, why so many double standards when talking about American democracy? I want to argue that double standards with which people of the Middle East are so accustomed are coming home and are sometimes left unquestioned. For example, with Bannon and the anti-Semitic remarks that often go unremarked. Imagine if there was somebody, say, from Palestine who had, say, a tenth of what Bannon or Breitbart is saying. What would have happened? So this is the point where one realized that the idea that democracy is suddenly in danger ceases to make sense. Don't people have an idealized version of democracy that needs debunking? Democracy is a political system, set of procedure, it's about substance, certain principle, dignity, equality, freedoms. But this is what commentators have in mind when they assert that Trump is a threat to democracy. But these interpretations are based on methodological nationalism. If we want to assess the vitality or quality of American democracy, one needs to adopt an internationalist perspective that is asking what is the democratic quality of the relation between the US and other parts of the world, especially countries entangled in or dependent on US goodwill or other forms of intervention, Iraq, Palestine, just to name two. People in the Arab Middle East have known and experienced for too many decades the hypocrisy of the discourse of democracy promotion. The standards of indefatigable liberalism at home are simply abandoned when it comes to foreign policy in the Middle East. So why more now or in the future, in the coming future, when we have already seen the nefarious effects of such discourses and practices? To be serious about protecting democracy inside the US means to relentlessly confront the double standards of American democracy here and abroad. Denouncing the double standards can offer an opportunity to develop a complex, nuanced critique of Trump and of the risk to democracy. Democracy is often a fig leaf to cover exactions abroad. People want to preserve democracy, then let this be also a fight for justice outside of this country. What is so dangerous in Trump's statements and appointments is that it combines a toxic mix that needs to be criticized in global rather than as single issues. I will connect this with insight from a book on social movements and the politics of security in the global south. Paul Amar's book, The Security Archipelago, invites the reader to go beyond the now ubiquitous critique of neoliberalism. In analyzing the transformation of protests in Cairo and in Rio de Janeiro, Paul Amar shows how certain subjects, often women or sexual minorities, are said to be in need of security governance in the name of culture or of the protection of authenticity. Thus, from the 1980s to the early 2000s, we moved from a neoliberal perspective geared at market-driven production of individualist consumers to what he terms post-neoliberal human security governance. Thus, instead of an effort by neoliberal policies to cover the entire globe, post-neoliberal ideas concentrate on isolated spots, hence the idea of archipelago in the book's title, in which the securitization of subject via new morality discourses comes to be deployed by a bizarre coalition of non-state, religious, and official actors. Public contestation over the permissible limits of urban sexuality emerges as a key factor inciting securitization, so Amar argues. Looking at Trump's nationalistic, bombastic law and order approaches to governance, we may wonder if we are seeing the same transformation that Amar describes in his book, namely racialized and sexualized subjects that need evangelical humanitarian crusading and the intervention of security paramilitary groups with the hidden or indirect blessing of a patriarchal political figure. In short, first let me state that more than upcoming policies, the disaster is the symbolic legitimation of violence against Muslim, people of color, foreigners, and sexual minorities that Trump's victory triggered. Second, let us not limit our discussion of the threat of Trump to only one issue. Only a few groups, in my view, have understood the necessity of creating cross-cutting alliances rather than an ominous retreat to a single issue. defense of sexual minorities, of black lives, of women's rights, environment, etc. This is where the power of organization and the power to coordinate a long-term response matter. Confronting Trump and his allies means learning from people's struggles internationally, making allies, and working in solidarity. Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about actually how we make those alliances and solidarity and what it takes to do that. And I study American social movements, and I'm particularly inspired by, particularly organizationally, not only in terms of ideas and goals, but the movement for Black lives as it is in the United States at this moment. Now, I'm inspired by it not only because it's a movement for Black lives, and I appreciate the way that it's sprung up and how effective it's been, but I'm inspired by it because of the model of social movement that they have invented. Basically, so which I want to tell you a little bit about. Because I think it is a recipe for the kind of long-term coordination between groups that we're going to need in the years to come. Okay, so there's two aspects to what I want to say about this. And it's not only about these are lessons that I take from what I have learned about the movement of Black Lives, but it's also just generally about what we, I think, need to do in the resistance going forward. Okay, one part of this is affective, and the other part of this is strategic, right? And then, of course, they come together as one, right? In the end, but I think both parts of this are really important. The first thing is that this is a long-term, right, as other panelists have said, this is going to be a long-term struggle. This may be a generational struggle. Probably will be. So we have to pace ourselves. And not only that, we have to understand that what we are doing is developing a habit and culture of resistance, not resisting for this moment only, right? So in pacing ourselves, we have to do actually what Jeremy said, which is to, meet our friends and allies and comrades and create deep emotional connections and bonds with people that we also hope to do this work with, right? Don't go it alone. we can't do. I'm sorry to say, right? I know that many of us have been liberals or are liberals here. We can't do it alone, right? We've got to do these things together. It's about collective action. All right. So in order to produce a habit and culture of resistance, we've got to get together. One of the reasons that this election has resulted in the way that it has, and this is partly to Anne's point, right, is that on the left we have let our institutions wither, right? And I don't mean only our political institutions, right? People, we've constantly talked about unions and other sort of political institutions on the left that have become smaller and smaller. But also, this is a sort of old, like, end of 20th century point, Robert Putnam point, right? Our book clubs, our bowling leagues, right? Our, bocce clubs, or whatever, right? These are the kinds of things that we stopped doing. We also stopped going to church or synagogue or whatever, right? Because we became too high-minded for those things. Or if we go, we don't talk to other people about it, right? So we have to reinvigorate our civic lives in both non-political and political ways, because guess what? Those things go together, right? You're having a potluck today and you're in a march tomorrow, and that's okay, right? Okay, so that's another thing. The other thing is, and this is going to sound very hippie-ish, but it is, you need to embrace your own light and the light of the people that you are working with and socializing with. And when I say that, I mean to say that we are going to be doing this work for a long time, but we also have to be having some kind of joy, right? Joy in the work, but also joy in each other. So if you knit, knit. If you bowl, bowl. If you cook, cook for everybody, right? Remember to embrace that and to share that with your people, and to meet new people and share it with them. Okay. The other thing is that we need to be kind to each other, and that means that we're all going to have really different points of view, right? Meaning that this coalition is going to have to stretch from Pantsuit Nation folks to communists, okay? Everybody, be kind, okay? You may be right. It could be, okay? That's not the point, right? The point is that, and that doesn't mean you have to compromise what you believe. What it means is that it's important through these civic organizations, through these get-togethers with each other, right, that we understand each other as people, even if we don't agree with each other where we're coming from. And we also understand that we're in the same fight, even if we're fighting different battles. Right? And the kind of punchline to this is we need to be kind to each other so that we can be dangerous together. Because if we're not dangerous together, then we won't be dangerous at all. Okay? So that's the affective part of it. The strategic part of it, and this is something, this is coming very, very, very much from the Movement for Black Lives as I've been sort of studying and investigating it. And it's very complementary to our intellectual way of being, right? Because it starts out with talk, right? To get together with people, talk, analyze, debate, talk about means and ends, experiment, strategize, plan, right? Develop a habit of talking to each other. In our civic, both political and non-political kind of groups and things that we're doing. This can be done and should be done both online and offline, so long as online conversations are safe, right? So right now, enlarge your online community so your in real life community can be as large as it can if it comes to a point where online is not safe, right? I mean that completely seriously. I'm not joking, right? So whatever groups you're in on Facebook, whatever kind of tweet conversations you're having or Instagram, whatever, enlarge that as much as you can and meet the people that you can in your area so that you have that in real life connection to those people in case online goes away, right? Okay. The other thing is that we really need to listen for understanding, not only to ourselves in this broad coalition where we want to be dangerous together, but to people who are not with us, right? Now, listening for understanding, and I take this directly from a piece that was just published on Public Seminar, Patchen Markell's piece, which I really encourage you to read because it's beautiful and also very insightful. But this idea of understanding has been collapsed often into a notion of empathy, that is sort of coddling, sort of like, I know you feel bad, like I should excuse the fact that you're a bigot who wants to kill me, right? No, that's not what listening for understanding is, at least in Arendtian terms. It means thinking in the place of another person, right? So that means that you're still yourself, you still believe what you believe, you still have the values that you have and the strategic goals that you have, but you listen, right? You don't cut those people off. Like, so all of you who have culled your Facebook list, wrong move, right? It means that you listen, okay, with trying to understand where people are coming from, right? In the place of the other. This doesn't necessarily change your mind about where you want to go, although it might. But what it does is it helps you speak to the problems that people are actually having and the pain that people are actually feeling from your perspective, right? And this is also something our other panelists sort of have said, right? Like, there are real roots, right? Both things that we would think of as legitimate and things that we would think of as illegitimate to the upsurge which caused the disaster we now find ourselves in. And in order to correct that disaster, right, to reinvent the world, right, in a way that we want to live in it, right, and that we want to pass it on to other generations, we have to speak, right, to those factors. We have to. Okay, so that means we have to listen. Okay. The other thing is act locally, right? This is part of what Anne has said and what others have said. Do what you can where you are, right? Find your groups, that's true. Find your issue, that's true. But also do what you need to do where you're at, right? In the institution that you're in. Including the new school, 100%, right? In the, if you're a parent, in the school district that you're in. If you're in a neighborhood, in the neighborhood that you're in. This is really important for strategic reasons, right? It's not only a kind of like, gimme feel-good thing. It's important because actually the conditions under which we live our lives, and this is something that the Movement for Black Lives knows, right, and acts on strategically, the conditions under which we live our lives are mostly set at the local level, right? This is why the Movement for Black Lives did not endorse any candidates, right, in the national election, wasn't really involved, was instead turning over prosecutors locally, was instead instituting citizen watch groups over police forces in places like LA, was instead running people for city council positions. This is because the decisions that these local bodies make more directly and more immediately and more quickly affect our lives, okay? It also helps us get into a habit of active citizenship, which most people, and not everybody, but most people have lost, right? Okay? And even people who used to be active citizens, right, in recent years had let it kind of go, right? Like the world was kind of, at least our world, not the whole world, was kind of going a little in the direction that we thought that it would go, right? The arc of the moral universe, right? Guess what? You know who bends the arc of the moral universe? You. Right? Us.
And unfortunately, potentially Mr. Trump.
And potentially Mr. Trump, absolutely. But that's the thing, is that, you know, we have, and this is partly, in speaking to Benoit, this is the last thing that I'll say, is that we have come to believe all these myths about the inertia of democratic, I don't know what you want to say, democratic democracy, right, itself. But all these things, right, like a democratic peace, there's all these kind of, like democratic benevolence, right, like we had come to believe that there was a democratic inertia that would just sort of go on as it had been going on, forgetting actually that it's bowed and broken in so many ways, right, in so many places, including in our own country, you know, along the way the whole time. And we've always had to fight to make it what it ought to be. And I think that we forgot that. And now we have to remember. And hopefully we can teach people who come after us that this is always so, right? That you never get to a point, and this is a sad thing, you don't ever get to that point, right, where everything is beautiful. Right? You don't ever get to that point where you've set it all up and all the tasks are checked off the checkbox and you can sit down, right? That's why you need joy in the process, because you just never get to that point. And so I hope that we are able to do these things and come together and be dangerous together, and take joy in the we that we can create.
Now we're going to have a discussion. And by plan, the first person to kind of start our discussion is Chiara Bonfici.
Should you hear?
Yeah, that's right. And for reason to make sure that everyone hears each other, speakers will, when you want to say something, you should get a microphone. And there are two of them.
So,
This one?
Yeah.
so working.
Does that help?
No.
Let's see if you can turn it on. Now it'll work.
Is it working?
No.
No.
Yes?
Yes. It's gone. Okay. So I would like to try to connect all the threads of the argument, and in particular, let's say, the more local perspective with the global one, which I think nicely complement each other, and throw it out as a kind of let's act glocal, which let's see if it works. So I think the point Benoit made about overcoming the methodological nationalism is crucial, both at the diagnosis level and the action level. And I say this because as I've seen all of this happening, beginning with this very slogan of Trump campaign, Make America Great Again, and I've been asking people, I mean, is it normal that you built your campaign on the idea that there has been such a decline, such a crisis, and you need a rebirth, which is very typical of fascist narratives. I mean, that's what I've been studying in the past. And people who know American history better than I do told me what Jeremy was mentioning, that actually Reagan was the first to use the same kind of, there has been such a defeat, there's been such a crisis, we can make it great again, right? So this is the triggering narrative. And obviously the analogies being Italian and I've been seeing Italian 20th century fascists, I've been seeing its neoliberal version with Berlusconi. I mean, this was triggering memories about the past. So I think there's something which is really fascist in what is happening, and this is precisely what you were also mentioning in terms of the legitimation of acts of violence, right? This sort of archipelago violence where people feel that they can do it or even feel that they have to do it. I don't know where that's what the archipelago metaphor was meant to suggest, but I think this is exactly what is at least I think is happening where we have to act. Now, the resistance part, like, I think we can learn by sharing information not only with the communities we live in, but also, and I mean, if there's a country and an institution that can do this, it's this one, connecting what is happening here and now to what is happening in other parts of the world with similar paths. I mean, the capitalist enterprise is global, so the resistance has to be global. Like, there's no way out. So I think we have to find a way to connect the local with the global in the most, let's say, effective possible way. And I think this is what we have seen doing. I mean, in the past, what we can learn and what I can say from my experience from the No Global movement, early 2000s, to Occupy Wall Street. I mean, one case I was in Europe, and the other was here. Now the No Border movement, the refugee movements in Europe. I mean, what I see is that when the movements have this capacity to connect globally, they're much more effective. I mean, there's a kind of spillover effect and imitation effect that makes them strong. So let's act global. I mean, that would be